can only imagine when that day comes.
Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day. We had some rain, not a lot, but we had a little rain out of our house, and those tomato plants are about like that. So I like to see that. Miss Pamela likes to see it even better than I do. So God is good. Thank you, brother. I would love to be able to say all is well with the world, but I'm afraid as long as human beings occupy the planet, it won't all be well, because Brother Robert Miranda, one time, he talked about his own people, but he of course, grew up in Mexico, graduated from university there in Mexico City. But he said, where 2 or 3 of my people are gathered together, at some point there's going to be a fight. He said he wasn't cutting anybody else. He said, that's just where we are. I miss him. He was a good guy. Quite a character. I think it was him that came across the border one time, and the federales, I guess, needed some spending money or whatever it was, but they put him in jail because they had advertised one of the brothers that worked for the big daily newspaper in Monterey, and he put an advertisement for a gospel meeting in the paper. So when he comes across the border, they have a warrant, they tell him, because that's illegal. He said, well, I grew up in Mexico. It wasn't illegal when I grew up. And the guy that worked for the paper had no idea. And so we figured what it was, but he told the authorities, he said, well, I'll tell you what, y'all got me in custody here, and I came to preach. If you're not going to let me preach to my brethren, I'll just preach to you guys. And he said, that old boy said, whoa, wait a minute. He goes in there and talks to somebody higher up the food chain. He comes back and he said, you can go. And so they turned him loose. That was Robert. Tell you one more Robert story. I got him on my mind today for some reason. And he's going on to be with the Lord, but one of the cartel bunches had a roadblock set up. That's when Sybil was alive, his first wife. And she said, we can pull up there, and there's these guys. Some of them got machetes, some of them got old guns and stuff. And said, Robert, instead of, showing some kind of fear or something, he said, I want to know something. Are you guys Christians? Well, he said, everybody in Mexico is going to say yes. And so they said, yeah. He said, well, I bet your mama's proud of you out here harassing folks and all that. And Sybil said the guy just backed him with passe, go on, So that was Robert. He was, of all the characters I've known, he was one of them. And preached the gospel all over South America, all over Latin America, and had good reputation through all that country. Let's have a word of prayer as we begin to study. Our Father, we're thankful for today. We're thankful for your Son, Jesus. We're grateful for the opportunity to once again go back and look at the events that led up to his crucifixion and his resurrection, his purchasing salvation for us when we couldn't find mercy on our own. And we're thankful for his grace and mercy and yours. And we pray that you'd be with us in the study this day. We're grateful for the beauty of it. And it's in Jesus' name we always pray, and amen. In Matthew, there's following through the study in the way that I've got it arranged, Matthew chapter 9 through 13, tells the story of the calling of Levi. We most of the time call him Matthew. Matthew is a Mississippian pronunciation of Matthew. But it's significant in all of that Jesus had among his followers, close followers, a representative of arguably the most despised class of human in the Israelite society. And that was tax collector. And if a tax collector could find hope, so could his colleagues. And so that I mean, you just have to know that ruffled a lot of feathers. And Levi wanted his colleagues to meet Jesus. Of course, some of them were shysters and what have you, but not all of them. It's like, when we make these categorical statements about a group of people, Robert was kidding around when he said his people will get into stuff. Well, mine will too. And in fact, my experience has been human beings generally, if you crowd them up too much, you get ornery with you. But he was joking. But this was not a joke. Levi wanted Jesus to meet these people, and he arranged a banquet for that purpose. But the Pharisaic scribes were watching developments. They were always lurking around, just like an old coyote on around a herd, hunting something, a weakness somewhere. And so they were there, and they saw the chief guest arrive with his disciples, and noted the type of other guests that he was meeting with. Most of them were tax collectors. And so some among those whom the Pharisees contemptuously call sinners, because, I got news for the Pharisaical everywhere. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God, including you. And so, that's a slur that certainly is inappropriate to throw around, as if you're free from it, And so, to the tax collectors and sinners, were highly undesirable company for a respected rabbi. Okay, so now you're a religious leader, and most religious leaders are interested in recruiting people to be part of what they're doing. Because, you shouldn't embrace any religion where you don't think you're right and can't produce, unless you can produce some evidence for people to think about. And so here we are in this situation. And the respectable, as they defined it, who says they're respectable rabbis? Well, they do. Okay. And so we see a lot of those assertions like that thrown out there. I'm always kidding with my wife because we'll both say sometimes that, well, they say. Well, I want to know who they are. Who are they precisely? And what gives them the qualification to speak to whatever subject that they're speaking to. Because a lot of times, we all know, people will make these bald assertions like that, and they don't offer a defense because there isn't one. Or if there is, they're not aware of what it would be. And so the tax collectors and sinners were highly undesirable company in their mind. And Jesus' action marked, in their opinion, was as less respectable. What I'm trying to get out, marks them as less than respectable. And so Jesus said, "Oh, guys," he came out to the head rabbi and he said, "Look, I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have done that. We're going to run all these people off." Is that what he did? No, it appears he just ignored them. Jesus would do that sometime. In his trial, if you could call that a trial, he just clammed up. He saw where that was going, and it was going to go in the way that he knew from the beginning. And so he just quit talking to him. And just, it seemed like Pilate, hurt his feelings. You're not going to talk to me. Don't you know I have the power of life and death over you? And what did Jesus tell him? You would have no power if my Father didn't grant it to you. And so there you are. But they despised the Pharisees, despised common people. And nonetheless, they're still curious enough to want to know why Jesus chose such company and, where all these crowds are coming from. And so they ask his disciples why is your master doing that? And the answer of Jesus distinguished him clearly from the Pharisees in this particular incident. And it gave a clue to his pattern of ministry. His words were, those who have no need of those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. There's a doctor I used to see in Adamsville, Tennessee from time to time, was a member of the church, internist, Dr. Mike Smelser. And I remember one time I had a sinus infection, one of the few that I've had. But anyway, he did, and went in and I said, Dr. Mike, how many people that are sitting out there in the waiting room are really sick? He said, probably about 10%. So the rest of them have got, symptoms, but may not what he would define as being sick, And said, what most of the time people need is to do what your mama told you, is go home, get some rest. If you got fever, treat that, He said that, and give them some chicken soup. I mean, they're going to get over it. They'll be all right. And so he wasn't there for the people that were well. And he's still not there for people that are well. Do you know that some of our people, one of them sitting right back there, that Sheets fella, and he's going to go out there and spend his afternoon and go through security, and it changes about every time you go out there, unless it's changed a lot. And he's going to go out there and spend his time out there with a bunch of convicts. What do y'all think? Well, I think that's exactly, if there's anybody in this Polk County region that need to know who the Lord is, it's those boys. Because when you look out across there, unless it's changed, the years that I was able to go out there, young men in their prime for the most part. And it used to hit me. I was like, what in the world are you doing here? Wasting this time. But the choices they've made. Most people earn their spot. And so he's here just for people that the Pharisees call sinners and look with disdain on. And he emphasized moral healing. That's a whole lot more important. As important as it is to deal with these physical maladies that people struggle with, but moral healing is a lot more important. Why would I say that? Well, because the source of judgment is going to be what we've done, what we did with the life that he gave to us, how we made the most of, if we did, of the opportunities that present themselves. That's what, and that's going to be for how long? Let's see, eternity. No end to it. And once disposition is made of our case, to borrow a little bit of legal talk. So, moral healing, the Pharisees were bad physicians in that they not only lacked a remedy for the needy, but they virtually refused to have any concern for the people that needed them. And as physicians are not needed by people who are well, so the Messiah is not needed among people who claim to be so much more righteous than everybody else. The Messiah alone has the remedy for those who recognize their sickness. He can heal the problem, the universal problem that people have, and that is the sin problem. The sneer of the Pharisees survives even now into the 21st century, and social distinctions have much too often hindered the work of the gospel. If somebody comes in, I don't think you'd get that here, but I know of a couple of places that I've been. Somebody that come in there that looked like a sinner, it wouldn't be warmly received, let's say. The people would know that they really weren't welcome. I think our people here have always been willing to reach out. Nobody's ever said to me otherwise. Well, where was that one time? But for the most part, people receive a welcome. And so I know one time dealing with the gospel, the VBS, somebody said something about, well, people are just dropping them kids off for somebody to babysit them. Great. We'll take them, and we'll do something good with them, something good for them. They'll have fun, and they'll learn something about the Lord. So it's hard for me to see a problem with that, Now, I wouldn't have dropped mine off anywhere where, if I didn't know the people, where I wasn't there. Just a long time ago, made that decision. And so Jesus includes everybody. And part of Matthew being picked, it seems to me, might have been to address that fact. Come now to a section in Luke. Matthew, Mark, Luke. What's after Luke? Huh? Okay, John. Somebody better say John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Luke chapter 5, verse 33 beginning. Long chapter. Luke had some long chapters. 33, or the monk that divided the chapters out and put the verses in, made some long chapters. But in Luke 5, we read verse 33, and they said to him, the disciples of John often fast and offer prayers. The disciples of the Pharisees also do the same. But yours eat and drink. And Jesus said to them, you cannot make the attendants of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them, can you? But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them. Then they will fast in those days. And he also was telling them a parable. No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, he will both tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled out, and the skins will be ruined. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wishes for the new. For he says, the old is good enough. And so all three of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three of those are placed a discussion about fasting after the account of Matthew's feast, as they arranged the material when the Spirit moved them to write. Just nothing in particular about that you need to know, other than the fact that it's just observation. A link between two incidents, however, was clearly intended, and social fellowship may, in some quarters, be considered unspiritual. It's funny how people categorize things, but fellowship is decidedly not unspiritual. Fellowship, table fellowship with one another, helps people grow closer to each other. They just naturally learn more about each other's lives, and that's a good thing, and that's as it should be. And so, in some quarters, it's still probably considered unspiritual. I can remember back, it's before my time, but I know men that remembered it, where some of the old timers would say, them hamburger Christians. Well, if I can share, make a fellow hamburger and get him to sit down and let me talk to him about the Lord, I'm okay with that. Remember one time, Brother Dobbs arranged a meeting with one of the brethren. It was unfortunately promoting error across the brotherhood, and Buster wanted to talk to him. And so when he went in there, all he ordered at the restaurant was a glass of tea. And the other fellow was trying to eat. I said, why in the world did you do that? He said, because I wanted him eating and be able to talk to him. And so if he's eating and I'm just drinking tea, I got the floor. Nobody but him would have thought of that, but that was him. And so we have these people, this Pharisees' approach to the practices of Jesus and his disciples was kind of a smug indifference. Rather than feasting in Matthew's house, their idea is, obviously from the question they posed, that they should have been fasting, according to the Pharisees' opinion. Well, okay, if that's your opinion, you go right on and fast. I tell you about me, if there's not some compelling reason to do it, I'm going to eat. So the other fellow does what he wants to do. John the Baptist, as well as the Pharisees, made much of fasting. They practiced that. Jesus didn't. He didn't condemn it. In his teaching, what he said was to the disciples, when you fast, this is how you do it. Put on old clothes, throw some ashes on yourself, and walk all bent over like that, like you're just about to kick the bucket, right? He said just the opposite of that. He said, when you fast, that's the practice they're doing, implying that's okay, but don't call attention to yourself. Don't do that with an eye towards everybody just being almost compelled to, oh, what a spiritual person he is compared to the rest of us. It's kind of like, and I don't mean any disrespect, but they in Roman Catholicism, the Pope washes feet about once a year out at the Vatican, and it's a regular scheduled thing, and that's okay. But have you ever seen him wash a dirty foot? Because the guy whose foot he's going to wash is going to do what? He's going to wash that foot. He's not going to have the Pope touching a dirty old foot, and so you just don't see the point of that. And with fasting, if you were, because he said that's what the Pharisees do, is they make themselves look all forlorn and they don't take care of themselves properly and or look like they're on their last leg. And he didn't approve of that because he knew the spirit from which it came. It's calling attention to self. And selfishness is the gateway to sin. Sin, every expression of sin that I can just about think of is a manifestation of selfishness. Somebody's violating the law of God because they're going to do what they want to do. And he gives us that, but there's a price to be paid for it. Price to be paid for it in this life, and a price to be paid for it in the judgment. Well, this difference, the way Jesus approached things and the way they did Jesus, if there's a big banquet, he would go. And he would be there among the people and visit with them and talk to them. And as his fame grew, he didn't ever lose that kind of a common touch. And people recognize that, and that's part of the reason they flock to him, probably. But this difference between Jesus and the Pharisees and even disciples of John, it confused the people. And the attitude of Jesus was judged to be, by many of them, just altogether improper. But Jesus answers the critics with an illustration. He said, can you make the wedding guest fast while the bridegroom is with them? What's the obvious answer to that? The obvious answer to it is no. This is a celebration. Man, it's taking a wife. And, that's a great day. Lady's giving her heart and her hand in marriage to this individual. And so that's a time for celebration. And the friends of Jesus were like guests at a wedding. He told them, the time to mourn is coming. He knew what was coming to him. He knew he was facing. But the time of mourning would not be until the bridegroom is snatched away from him. And up until then, well, it's a good time to celebrate. None of his hearers knew what was in Jesus' mind when he said this. He was the bridegroom. And he knew that he had to die. He's accepted that role. He's accepted that mission. Whereas he's on a mission he's not going to come back from, and is willing to do that. His mission could not be accomplished without his death. You remember when he prayed to the Father, he said, if it be possible, what? Let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And so, while he was still with them, they have no place for sorrow. And so they did celebrate. Jesus continued with two other illustrations. He had often seen poor people patching rough old garments. You didn't throw it out. I can remember my wife saying, and different other relatives, about treasuring the time she got a dress that nobody else had worn previously. Well, today, for the most part, most families I deal with, that's if you tell them that, they look at you astonished, But that used to be pretty common. People did the best they could with what they had, and that's what they were doing here. But he'd seen people patching their rough garments, and it was common sense to use old patches for cutting a piece from a new garment would unnecessarily ruin the new clothing. The new patch of unshrunk cloth would readily tear the old material in the first washing. Now, I don't know if they had scrub boards in ancient Palestine like they used to here. You have a number 2 tub and one of those scrub boards, and you can get clothes clean. You can also tear them up if you're not careful with them. Beating them on a rock would knock some of the junk out of it, but it's rough on those fibers. And so he said that would readily, and they all caught that. Well, no one seriously would consider further new wine into an old wineskin. I believe we mentioned that even last week, because those skins, at this point, if they've been used, they would be shriveled up, and the leather wouldn't survive the vitality of that new wine, because as it goes through the fermentation process, it generates gas. And you have to vent that in some way, or with the case of these skins, don't fill it too much where it can accommodate the expansion. So the obvious practice is to use the new wineskins for new wine. Well, what was the meaning of the illustrations? Well, the old clothes and the old wine represent the approach of John the Baptist and the Pharisees with their fasting, and the new garment, the new wine, represent the approach of Jesus. John was really the last of the old prophets before, as the new way, the new covenant is going to be ushered in. And so it wasn't that he necessarily was doing anything wrong. He was fulfilling the role that he had. But Jesus is here, institute something that's new. And so did Jesus declare that fasting was an outworn religious practice? That cannot be, since Jesus sanctioned fasting on another occasion when he talked to the disciples about it and said, when you fast, this is how to do it. Obviously, he didn't go on and say in that setting, don't do what most often happens, but he said, this is what to do. And so he had sanctioned it. He didn't bind it, did he? Anybody know of any place Jesus bound that on people on the new covenant? Well, that's because he didn't. And he was condemning as outworn and cramping, if you will, or stifling the stubborn viewpoint that no new approach can improve on the past. And Jesus was here to say that it most certainly did. when certain religious rites became sanctified by long use, and one writer says stultified by custom, there was also a strong body of conservatism to oppose any reform of anything at any time. But there's, the exception has to be Messiah has the authority to reform things. Somebody can show up here today and say, well, Jesus told me this or that, and that's not going to fly. But if Jesus were here, and that was confirmed by signs, wonders, and miracles, and said we need to do this and all a little different, I wouldn't argue with him. But there is a moment's reflection which show that this unique teaching of Jesus could not possibly be poured into the same old wineskins of the former covenant that had made Pharisaism thoroughly legalistic. New molds were needed. It was time. He was here to institute that change. The essential message was more important than the outward shell of old religious practice. We can do something. It's all right to have traditions. But just because we've done something traditionally a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it would be wrong to do it differently. If you go, as you travel about, you guys travel from place to place, you'll see people sometime when they do the communion. They do it whenever they want to do it. I mean, they can do it and arrange it to service how it best fits their situation. And it should not be a problem among us, just it's like one choice. But the wine was more, and this illustration is way more important than the skins. And fasting had its uses, but it was not to be regarded as indispensable. The approach of Jesus to the practice illustrates his approach to many, many features of the old order that were just cultural, that were just established by long tradition, and had nothing whatsoever, not in the law of Moses, not even part of that. And so his mission was not intended to be a patching up process of what had accrued over the years. His approach was to introduce an entirely new and productive way of life. And no one who advocates new approaches, as Jesus constantly did, is going to be able to avoid conflicting with various sacred cows and the status quo. And so, thus, he deals with those things, deals with them decisively, moves on. He didn't ever allow that to become a big difficulty. In Luke chapter 7, in the very next chapter, there is the healing of the centurion's son. It's a real interesting episode. This Roman centurion, that's commander, what we would call a company commander, would probably carry the rank of captain. And he commanded 100 men. And this man is a very unique guy. It says, when he had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. And a centurion's slave, who was highly regarded by him, was sick and about to die. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built our synagogue." Now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason, I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am a man placed under authority with soldiers under me, and I say, go to and I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. Now, when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found that the slave was in good health. The incident follows one of the few narratives in Matthew and Luke that include this. Mark omits it, not for any particular reason, but it's just not in there. But Matthew and Luke include it, and I'm certainly glad that they did. It took place at Capernaum, as was read, and already the scene of notable incidents. And so the main interest focused on a Gentile's faith. Now, so we've just seen where he accepts a tax collector of all things, and you know that the Jews did not accept. They're occupied by the Roman army. They're under the administration of a foreign government. They're not happy with that. The taxation system was set up kind of like you bought a franchise, and you had so much assessed that you needed to get to Rome or to wherever it went regionally, probably, and plus all you could steal. I mean, they didn't care, and sounds kind of similar to some of the things I'm hearing today within our own system. Programs that are designed to help people being abused. 50 years ago, as a young guy, very young guy, I worked for the Department of Human Services for a time before I went to college in the year that I was out of school, and there was a lot of graft then. So I can only imagine after 50 years, but I stray. He's focusing on a Gentile's faith. He's accepted as tax collector. Levi, we call him Matthew most of the time. He accepts various people from around society, that the society, the elite religious leaders consider to be just human refuse. And so the story is representative of the relationship between Gentiles and Israel's Messiah. A detachment of Roman soldiers is stationed in the town, and it was commanded by the centurion, I wish we knew his name, who was highly respected among the town's inhabitants. Normally, the general Jewish public despised the Roman army, but there was something different about this man, and he had provided the synagogue building, which showed his sympathy for the Jewish faith. I suspect if he was not what they called a God-fearer, that he might have even been a proselyte. Don't know. But he had provided the building for the synagogue, and remains of a later synagogue still stand at the site of Capernaum, in archaeological digs. And so, but this synagogue was erected on the foundations, this newer one, and in its ruins, they found inscriptions that show a curious mixture of Jewish and Gentile emblems, which some think preserved from the earlier building when the centurion was there. The Jewish community, deeply indebted to a Gentile for provision of a center of Jewish worship, was and certainly rare. And it reflects something of the unusual character of the centurion. As I said, he might have been a proselyte, a Gentile convert to the Jewish faith, but the details of the story really don't support that, because evidently he was a man of great piety, as the Jewish elders spoke well of this Roman centurion. It's not surprising that he showed evidence of real faith. Herschel, do you have? Yeah, 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 and that's just circumstantial, but that's right. Um, and so the circumstances are very simply stated. The centurion's servant was sick. Luke calls him a slave, because if you're a servant, you probably were a slave. You have to just get into the language. And the New American Standard, I made that decision. And he calls him a slave. But he was a man that was critically ill. And the centurion thought a lot of him. Slave or no slave, he thought a great deal of the man. And the officer had heard of Jesus' power to heal. And so he requested his help. As a Gentile, he hesitated to go personally to the house where Jesus was living, because Luke says that he sent some Jewish elders. He asked them to come, and he told them what he wanted, and to ask Jesus to come and heal his servant. Matthew omits intermediaries and describes Jesus in direct conversation with the centurion. I think that probably happened a little bit later, but Luke brings out more clearly the nature of this man's faith and his humility. Both writers emphasize the contrast between the Jews' lack of faith and the faith of this Gentile in the claims of Jesus. And the Jewish elders recommended the centurion to Jesus. They went to him and they said, he's a good man. He may be a Roman, but he's a good man. And so they recommended him as a worthy man, and he was a man of at least moderate wealth. Some of the officers and what have you in the Roman army came from high-placed families. It was soldiering was a highly regarded among the Romans profession. But he had his servants. He had provided a synagogue. And so it's significant that the man himself disclaimed his own worthiness. And by that, he may have just simply been respecting Jewish scruples against entering into a Gentile's house. The Jewish people thought, oh man, we don't have that mixing. I had a friend that's an Apache, and he was talking about, I'd never heard this in my life, but he's talking about people. And he said he liked all kind of people. But he said, I observed something from the birds. He said, there's all kind of birds sitting up in that tree. Yeah. And they come down and they eat together. Yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying. He looked at me and said, they don't mix. I think you've drawn I didn't try to engage him in debate on that, but I thought, oh boy, that's going to take a while to unpack that. And he was, they're still around, some of those old Apache warriors. But as an officer, this man knew what it was to be under authority and have people under his authority. And so he's used to, snapping out orders to subordinates and expecting and requiring prompt, unquestioning obedience. That some of the men here have been in the military, and for example, that if a bird colonel barks, everybody's going to come to attention. As far as that goes, a senior sergeant can get everybody focused on what he's talking to them about. And so the centurion may have been just not wanting to overstep and know what Jewish scruples were. I'm not going to ask him to come into my house. And isn't that sad, though? Isn't that sad that a man of that character and that quality would have to feel like he needed to jump through all those hoops? And now that wasn't something Jesus imposed at all, because he was open to everybody. But anyway, he was that. He's a strong man of, no doubt, of commanding, authoritative presence. He had what we call command presence. And he submitted readily to the higher authority of Jesus. He'd already made up his mind about Jesus. And he came out and indicated that if Jesus just gave the command, the servant would be healed. No need, Lord, to trouble yourself. You just speak the word, and it'll be that way. And so he had implicit faith that Jesus' authority over disease was just as real and just as sufficient as his authority over the men under his command, and that at Jesus' command, the healing would instantly occur. And so Jesus marveled at the man's faith. He declared, not in all Israel have I seen such faith as this man. And so there wasn't a magical element in it. Many in the future with the same kind of faith as this Gentile would outstrip those who thought that they possessed some hereditary right to sit with the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, at the Messianic banquet. It was the Jews' firm belief that such a banquet would inaugurate the Messianic age. But they never considered that the Gentiles would share in such a privilege. Jesus stated that even the sons, that is the Israelites, would forfeit their right to be present because of their unbelief. The only alternative for them was outer darkness. So that may be that seems harsh at first, but Jesus is not suggesting that the believing sons would be excluded. But he's saying these sons of Israel who manifest a refusal to accept Jesus and to come to heal, that they would be lost, but not the ones that believe. In the narratives, the healing itself is almost incidental. Matthew specifically notes that it occurred at the moment when Jesus spoke his command. And the extraordinary power of Jesus again comes into focus. And it was not merely power to heal, but also the power to inspire faith. Real faith. Some reason may be suggested for the greater depth of the faith in a Gentile than in most of the Jews. Or I should say, some reason can be suggested for that. Jewish minds were at that time so bound up in a variety of theological prejudices that they considered it essential to be doubly sure before entrusting themselves to one making claims such as Jesus made. Gentiles, on the other hand, were less enchained by tradition and could react more readily to the powerful things that they were witnessing, this demonstration of authority. If someone says to the Sea of Galilee, "Be still," and it cuts off. I grew up around the ocean, and if that had happened with me, I'd have walked on water. I'd have been scared of whoever had that kind of authority. Yes, ma'am.